College fee or a vacation house? My parents chose the vacation house. I chose to leave them, went no contact, until my dad broke this news to me. So, I, 28 male, ran away from home when I was 18 because my parents were jerks who promised to help me out with my college tuition. But at the very last minute, they backed out and told me that they couldn't help me out, leaving me with no other option than to rely on somebody else for the money. Let me just make it clear, I was not entitled enough to believe that they owed it to me or anything. But I had been told by my parents categorically that they would pay my college tuition for me when the time came. My parents were well off. My dad had his own business, and it was quite successful in its own right, and my mother was a moderately successful real estate agent. So I had a relatively comfortable childhood, and everything was taken care of. I never had to worry about money, and I am thankful for it. I went to private school my entire life and never had to work a day until I turned 18. The reason for that was that my parents always reassured me that they would pay for everything, and I would be taken care of. So, I never thought that I would ever need to worry about how I was going to pay through college because my parents always told me that they were going to handle it all. Naturally, I never felt the need to go out and look for a job or anything because I assumed that it would be taken care of since I trusted my parents and knew that they would handle it. I also didn't have any reason not to trust them or to question them because they always gave me whatever I asked for, and I had a great relationship with my parents, so there was no reason for me to doubt them. I would not say that I was spoiled, but I was always taken care of, that was for sure. I never had any extraordinary demands either, so I was pretty easy to handle as a kid. But around the time of my 18th birthday, I started noticing that my dad was really getting worried about work and would spend way too much time in his office, which is not something that he used to do before. He seemed to be constantly stressed out, and I never knew why. I asked my mother several times if he was alright because he didn't seem so, and my mother kept telling me that he was fine, even though his behavior said otherwise. This went on for a few months, and I just assumed that it might be something work-related that he wasn't willing to talk about. But I didn't let it affect me because I had my finals coming up, and I was too busy studying and cramming last minute to care about anything else. After my finals were over, it was time for me to celebrate my 18th birthday, and I was having a relatively stress-free week until the day of my birthday. On the morning of my birthday, my parents came to my room and wished me well, but instead of leaving, they told me to get dressed and come downstairs for an emergency family meeting in the living room. They looked pretty grim, and that should have been my signal to understand that something was very wrong, but I still had no idea what was about to come. I got dressed quickly and headed downstairs. Once we were all seated, my father started telling me that he had kept a secret from me for quite a few months now, but he thought that it was the right time to tell me the truth. My mother could barely look me in the eye, and my dad also seemed pretty fidgety. He told me that the business had been struggling for the past couple of months, which is why he had been working extra hard to make ends meet and to be able to pay all of his employees. But it's been a struggle. He told me that he himself had to take several salary cuts just so he could still continue to pay his employees, and my mother was the one handling all the household expenditures for the past few months, which was difficult because our lifestyle was quite expensive, and my mother did not make enough, at least not as much as my dad. But things were back on track now, and his business was finally doing well again, so they were going to recover the losses soon enough. I thought that was what the meeting was about, so they would just include me and tell me about it. But there was more to it, and that's what they wanted to talk to me about. They told me that now, since they were going to have to be a little more careful with money, they could not afford to send me to college on their dime anymore. I was shocked because I thought they told me that the business was doing well again, so there was no reason they couldn't afford to send me to college and pay for me. But they told me that apparently, the losses in the business were not all. They had also apparently spent my college fund on a holiday home in Cabo a couple of months ago, right before my dad's business started suffering. They could have sold the holiday home, but they figured that they were just going to earn back the money soon enough and did not think that my dad's business would be in a slump for so long. My parents did not sell the holiday home because they felt attached to it and continued to spend money from their own pocket instead of just doing the sensible thing and selling a few of their unnecessary assets. This is what led them to realize that they could not send me to college, not without their finances taking a huge hit. And that was it. My world turned upside down that day, and I remember just losing my absolute mind when my parents told me that they would not be able to live up to the promises that they had been making to me for the past few years. I wasn't mad at them because my dad's business was doing badly, that would be pretty shallow of me, but I was mad that they didn't think it was important to tell me about it so I could at least get a job or something and try to earn some money of my own so I wouldn't have to depend entirely on them for my college tuition. I know that it wouldn't be much, I wouldn't be able to make much money by working for a few months before I was supposed to start college, but at least it would be something. I was also very upset that they had chosen to keep the holiday home and everything else instead of just selling off a few things like normal people. It was pretty materialistic of them to prioritize that instead of my education. I think I yelled at them about it for a long time, and their only defense was that they were very attached to these things and it held a lot of sentimental value to them. Which was a lot of BS, because how can that ever be more important than sending me to college, especially when they had promised me so many times that they would take care of it all. I was really disappointed, and I didn't bother to hide it either. They had really hurt my feelings by lying to me and hiding things from me, especially when these were things that I deserved to know, and more than deserved, I needed to know, because otherwise, it would only create trouble for me in the future. And it did. We got into a very bad fight that day. My parents accused me of only caring about money and being an entitled and ungrateful brat, but I don't think that was right because I was only asking for what had been promised to me. I didn't think that they had to pay for my college tuition, but after they had promised me for years that they would, I think it was fair for me to be mad. Even if they had told me about it a couple of months before they did, I wouldn't have had a problem with it. But they told me just a few weeks before I was supposed to start, and it left me with nowhere to go, and I was a total mess. A lot of things were said, and the fight ended with me going back up to my room and crying until it was dark. It was my birthday, but I didn't even want to talk to anybody, so I turned my phone off and tried not to think about my bleak future. I could get a student loan, but even that would require my parents to sign off on it. And given their financial condition at the time, it would take them a while to recover from the losses that they had faced in the past few months. I don't think that they were ready to take on a loan at that point in time. Otherwise, they would have suggested it themselves. So, I didn't know what to do, and I just kept crying in my bed because I was so upset. What made me feel worse was the fact that my parents didn't even bother to come up and check on me, as if they didn't even care about me. That really hurt my feelings. Towards the evening, I started feeling upset and angry instead of just sad. In the heat of the moment, I decided that I was going to teach my parents a lesson and started packing my clothes and stuff so I could run away from home. At the time, I was not aware that this would turn into a permanent thing, and in no way would I have ever been able to predict my future in 1,000 years when I was 18. I guess I was being a bit of a brat at that time because I just wanted to get back at my parents and get them all worried about me. So, I sneaked out of my room and out through the kitchen door, carefully enough not to alert anybody in the house that I was leaving. I was quiet enough and was able to leave without much noise, and nobody noticed that I was gone. From there, I headed to my girlfriend, my current wife's, house. My wife, Haley, 28 Fahrenheit, was my childhood sweetheart, and I knew that I could count on her. Besides, she had been calling me all morning, but I hadn't been able to respond to her, so I thought I would just pay her a visit. I also knew that I was welcome at her home whenever I wanted to go because her parents loved me, and it would not be an issue. When I got to her house, she was the one who opened the door, and she told me how worried she had been because I hadn't been responding to any of her calls or messages all day, and I had even canceled the party that I had invited them over for. So we hugged it out, and I told her everything that had happened that day. She seemed shocked because she knew my parents as well, and she was also struggling to come to terms with the fact that they would do something so stupid. I told her that I had run away from home with a few of my things and I was going to hide out in her house for a few days, and she seemed to be okay with it. But when I told her parents about my reckless plan, they were obviously against it and tried to tell me as politely as they could that it was a very bad idea and it could backfire on all of them if they helped me out. At the time, I didn't realize that what they were saying was true because I was just an idiot and tried to argue with them. But they told me very firmly that they were going to call my parents and talk to them, but I could stay here until they had sorted things out. I didn't mind it, though, since I knew that her parents and my parents were good family friends, so they would probably at least get my parents to apologize to me, which is pretty much just what I wanted at that point because that's the least that they could do for me. Instead, when my in-laws, Haley's parents, came back into the room after about an hour of being on the phone, they told me that I had to live with them for a few days because my parents were not ready to take me back yet. I guess, in a way, I have to thank my in-laws for making that phone call because otherwise, my life probably would have taken a very different turn. On the phone call, Haley's parents had apparently told my parents that I had run away from home after they had told me that they would not be able to pay for me to go to college. They had expected them to have a good laugh about it because it was kind of childish of me, since I was just trying to teach them a lesson. But my dad was furious on the phone, and he screamed at Haley's dad and told him that if I really wanted to run away from home, then I could live with him for as long as I wanted to, and that he was not ready to take any more responsibility for me or what I did since it was very clear that I was nothing but an ungrateful brat and I didn't care about the well-being of my parents. I only cared about money and myself, so they were done with me now, and I could either apologize to them and beg for forgiveness, or I could stay away from my parents. My in-laws had the good sense not to tell me about what they had been told on that phone call when they came back into the room and just told me that I had to stay with them for a few days. I was okay with it because it just meant that I got to spend more time with my girlfriend. I also assumed that my parents would come around eventually and everything would be fine again, but that never happened. On the third day of my stay at Haley's house, her parents sat me down and finally told me that my parents had said that they were not going to speak to me until I had apologized to them for my behavior. I thought it was crazy, and I was quite indignant, so I told them that I was not going to apologize to anybody for what I did because I think I was perfectly reasonable in behaving the way I did. Haley's parents tried to reason with me and told me that while they supported me and honestly believed that this was my parents being inconsiderate and quite unreasonable, I had to go back home eventually, and for that, I needed to apologize to my parents. But I told them that I was putting my foot down, and I was not going to apologize to them. I wouldn't even go home if it really came down to it, and I didn't want to be an inconvenience to them, so I would just look for a place to stay elsewhere. However, as I had mentioned earlier, Haley's parents loved me and told me that I was not going to go and live anywhere else until this fight was sorted out and I would just have to stay with them. When I insisted that I leave since I didn't want to be a burden on them, they rubbished all of it and told me that they didn't mind and that I was not a burden to them. So that was quite nice of them, and I ended up spending the next few weeks in their house until it was time for me to go to college. Yeah, I was actually able to go to college, and that's also thanks to my in-laws. Because about a week after I left home, my father-in-law sat me down and told me that he had arranged for the money for my tuition and I could finally make my peace with my parents now. He also told me that I didn't have to worry about the debt or anything, that I could pay it off eventually once I had a job, and it wouldn't have any interest rates either since this was not a student loan, so it would be easier for me. So then he told me to call my dad and talk to him so we could sort things out and I could move back in with them. But I didn't think it was a good idea because my problem was not with the availability of funds, it was with the fact that my dad didn't even think that it was his fault and he had nothing to be sorry about. It was the fact that he and my mother had been lying to me and giving me false hope for months, knowing that eventually, they would just have to let me down, and that just broke my heart. Even if they were to go broke, I would still love them as my parents, but I cannot forgive the fact that they had been lying through their teeth. That was not acceptable to me. So I told Haley's dad that while I appreciated his attempt to get me to reconcile with my parents, I was not going to do so, and I also couldn't accept the money because I didn't want to be in debt to him. So I tried to tell him that I didn't need the money, but he told me that I had to go to college whether or not I reconciled with my parents. He had already borrowed money from a friend, so it had to be put to use. Once again, Haley's dad came to the rescue, and I was able to go to college. I told him that I wasn't comfortable taking money from him because I didn't want to be in debt, but he dismissed it by saying that I could just work after college and pay him back. He had already taken out a loan, so now I had to go to college. So I ended up going, and it turned out to be one of the best decisions of my life. I couldn't thank Haley's dad enough for it. He let me live with him, and he also funded me. I couldn't ask for anything else. Not just that, he tried to talk to my parents several times so that they would understand how I was feeling, but with no success. My parents just refused to reconcile with me or apologize to me, and before I knew it, years had passed, and I hadn't spoken to my parents after that one fight. That was the last time that I met them in person, and they were not even present at my graduation because they cut me off completely once I had run away from home. It was quite disappointing since I had always assumed that they would come around eventually, but the more I waited, the less likely it seemed. Haley's parents tried their best to be there for me, and I was quite grateful for it. Sometimes it did help me to forget that my own parents did not care about me, and I really don't think that I could have gotten through that period of my life without their support. They would always let me know that they were there for me and occasionally even told me that my parents would be proud of me. But I didn't know that because my parents were no longer in my life. It was pretty difficult to deal with emotionally because I always had a great relationship with my parents growing up. But the fact that one fight was all it took to completely ruin our relationship was just a bit disheartening, and my parents actually chose their material possessions and ego over their own son. That's just sad. So I never called them, and they never bothered to reach out to me. That was just how we stopped speaking to each other, and a lot of time has passed since then. 1 decade, to be precise. So there has been a lot of change in my life. First off, I got married a couple of years ago to the love of my life, no surprises there, of course. I got married to Haley, and life has been blissful since then. About a year ago, I had a beautiful baby boy with my wife, which just completed our family. I thought that might have been a reason for my parents to reach out, but they didn't even bother to ask about their own grandson. It's fine though, I'd kind of given up hope that they would ever contact me once I got married without them being present at the ceremony. Not just my personal life, but things have changed a lot for me in my career as well. I started out working at a small firm, and I guess you could say that I worked my way to the top because now I'm in a manager position, and I get paid pretty handsomely. I have been able to pay off my debt to my father-in-law, even though he never brought it up and never asked me for the money because that's just the kind of person that he is. I wanted to let him know how grateful I am to him for everything that he has done for me, so I paid the money back to him, a little more than the original amount. It's just money. It can never actually show anybody how grateful I am for all their support throughout my life. So in the past 10 years, things have changed for me, and I would say that life has only gotten better. My 18-year-old self would be really proud of me if he knew where I had gotten to. I genuinely never expected that I would hear from my parents ever again because, well, let's be honest, they had numerous opportunities to reach out to me. They could have tried to do so at my graduation, when I got engaged or married, or even when I had my first child. But they didn't, and that was a choice that they were making. There was no way that they didn't know about any of these events because I posted them on social media, and I had a lot of relatives added there, so somebody must have told them, but they didn't care, so they didn't contact me. I missed them in spite of everything, but I had stopped holding out hope that they would contact me at any point because it was very clear to me that to them, nothing was more important than themselves. They refused to acknowledge the fact that they were wrong for what they did all those years ago. If they couldn't accept that they were wrong, I couldn't let them back into my life because then it would just get toxic and messy. So, in order for us to have a relationship again, they had to acknowledge their mistakes. Then, about a week ago, my dad reached out to me after almost 10 years, and it was not good news. After some small talk about my job and my life, he informed me on the phone call itself that my mom's health was deteriorating, and he wanted me to come back home for a couple of days so I could spend some time with my mother. When I asked him what was wrong, he told me that my mother had been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease a couple of years ago and she was really suffering. I was shocked that it had been years since her diagnosis and my parents hadn't thought it was important to tell me about it. Regardless of our fights and everything, I think this was pretty big news, and I should have been told about it. I couldn't hold back my anger, and I snapped at my dad, asking him why he hadn't told me. He told me that he didn't think it was important because he didn't think I would care since I hadn't reached out to them for a really long time. So we ended up getting into another fight, where it was just us blaming each other for not reaching out and being too egoistic. I was accusing him of the same thing that he was accusing me of, but I was convinced that I was right. After some arguing, my dad snapped at me and told me that he had known it would be a bad idea to call me and that my mother had been wrong. He said I still didn't care about them and was going to hold a grudge forever. So then he hung up, and we didn't speak after that. I told my wife about that conversation, and she told me that instead of fighting with him, I should have just agreed to visit my mother. Because, all things said and done, they are still my parents, and my mother is sick. If she was asking for me to visit, then my dad and I should have just let sleeping dogs lie instead of letting our massive egos get in the way of a family reunion. She thinks that choosing to fight with my dad instead of just letting it go, especially because it has been 10 years, was not the right thing to do. She wants me to visit my parents so I can meet my mother. But I don't agree. I think my dad is being very inconsiderate, and I don't want to go to his house because then I will be forced to apologize to him or at least address the elephant in the room. But I'm also afraid that I might eventually never be able to speak to my parents again, and I don't think I want that. So AITA because I fought with my dad when he called me to tell me bad news about my mother. Update 1 Hello. So I spoke to my wife again, and Haley really made me realize the fact that I was acting exactly like my father by refusing to reconcile with my parents. So now I have decided that I'm going to visit my parents and try to fix things with them. I'm not going to apologize because I don't think I owe that to them, and I'm sure that they are not going to apologize to me either. But anyway, in a couple of hours, I will head out and Haley will stay at home with our son. We have decided that if everything goes well this time, I might even invite them home to meet their grandson. This family feud has gone on for too long, and I think it's time to bury the hatchet. I want my son to have a relationship with his grandparents, and I want to have a relationship with my parents. Because, like Haley said, at the end of the day, they still are my parents. I still don't know how they are going to respond to my visit, but I'm hoping that things work out well. Keeping my fingers crossed, pray for me. Update 2, so I came back from my visit to my parents a couple of hours ago, and I'm happy to say that it went pretty well. My dad was the one who opened the door to me, and as soon as he saw me there, he just broke down into tears and pulled me into a big bear hug. I started crying as well because it had been so long. It was just way too emotional for me. And then I met my mother. She looked like a shell of her past self, and that was really depressing. We talked about a lot of things. I told them all about my life, and it was nice. We also reconciled and decided that we were all being really stupid. They apologized for the incident from 10 years ago and said that they should have been better parents. I told them that, in recent times, maybe I could have also been a better son. I have also invited them over for dinner next week, and they are finally going to meet their grandson. I don't know who is more excited about that, them or me. Anyway, I'm just happy that everything went smoothly and I can finally have a relationship with them again. I came back and told Haley, and even she was thrilled about it. So we are thinking about turning the next week into a family dinner with both our parents. Update 3. Hey, so this is coming just a couple of hours after the family dinner, and oh boy, it was a total blast. Everybody had a great time, and it was just really warm and comfortable. My parents and my in-laws finally reconnected after a really long time since they had not been speaking on my account. My parents got to meet my son for the first time, and that was really emotional for them. We all cried a bit, but yeah, we are thinking about turning this into a regular thing now. Being around them really made me realize how much I had missed my parents in the last decade, and now that I'm back on good terms with them, I don't think I ever want to let that go, especially not with my mother's condition. I honestly don't know how much time I have with her, and I want to make the most of it no matter what. So we are going to try and make it a point to meet more often, and I really hope that it works out well for all of us.